right. Well, I hope everyone can hear me. We are going to get started right away, and we appreciate you sticking with us in the midst of the technical difficulties. And with that, we will get going. So, thank you everyone for joining us. We're very excited about what we're doing here today. Here on the first episode of the Extra Pro-Life show. And of course, this is where we discuss all things related to abortion in Canada and beyond. And so that is how we seek to equip you on these episodes. And of course, on this show, we want to give you a look into organizations who are tackling the crisis of abortion and help you learn from those organizations, which are pro-life organizations, just like us. So we want every person in Canada to reject abortion, and so hopefully this show will inspire you and equip you to do just that. And so with throughout the show, this is just a bit of a housekeeping item. We want you to submit questions. We want you to ask your questions to Scott, and so we have sort of a first half of the show portion, and that's where we will ask him some questions that we want to get out, and then the second half of the show we want to open it up to everybody who is watching. If you have questions for our guests as well. Now, my name is Ben Matichuk, and it is my pleasure to represent the National Campus Life Network as the Regional Coordinator of Alberta and as today's host. And we are proud. We are excited about what we get to do nationally, and that is work with 21 clubs and over 200 youth across Canada to fight the greatest human rights injustice of our time. You can find out more about what we do at ncln.ca. Maybe you're here this afternoon and you are pro-choice. Maybe you're pro-life, and either way, we want you to be commenting throughout the show with questions you do have for our guests. Obviously, it's always a contentious topic, and you know what? I'm just gonna come out and say it. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm actually pro-life myself, and so is our guest, one of the other radicals in this country who has thrown their lot into the pro-life movement because of a strange counterculture belief that abortion is wrong, and that man is Scott Hayward. So Scott is a chartered professional accountant from Brandon, Manitoba, and president and co-founder of Right Now, a political pro-life organization focused solely on nominating and electing pro-life politicians federally and provincially across Canada. Scott earned his Bachelor of Business Administration degree from Brandon University in June 2012 and earned his Chartered Accountancy designation in June 2015. In September 2015, Scott left public practice and began to work full-time in the political pro-life movement. In January 2016, he co-founded Right Now with Alyssa Globe and currently operates as his president. Now, I first met Scott back in Ottawa, and we didn't get to talk much then. We'll change that now, but the work that Right Now does resonates very closely with me, as political door knocking and phone calling is something that I myself grew up doing. So with that, we want to welcome Scott into the show. Scott, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, first thing I want to touch on here with you is, obviously we're going to get into the leadership ballot. First, what I know of you is of course, as it says in the bio, that you left public practice as an accountant and you joined the pro-life movement. I would like to know why.
Yeah, so like you said in the introduction, my professional background is that I'm a CPA, a chartered professional accountant, and I hold that designation to this day. So it was during my time in public practice, I was working in a public accounting firm, and I was doing so in order to get my letters. Nowadays, you don't have to do that, but back then you did. And it was during that time that my friend and now colleague, Alyssa Globe, the other co-founder of Right Now, came out to Manitoba, to Brandon, to talk about what was happening in the political pro-life movement. And so a little bit more about me is that my background is I'm practicing Catholic. I come from a practicing Catholic household. It was something, the abortion issue was something that we discussed often, still discuss often to this day. But the other half of it, my political background, is that I started following politics on a day-to-day basis when I was 10 years old, which I discovered later, not the average person does that. And I recognize that. But during the 2000 leadership race, the 2000 federal election, I was following politics. So though I had those two big passions about me, being the pro-life issue and politics. So when Alyssa came out in 2013, I listened to her talk, we struck up a friendship, and over the next couple of years, she encouraged me, and maybe a little bit of cajoling and threatening for me to leave public practice and go full-time into the political pro-life movement. And so, I made that decision back in the spring of 2015. It was a big decision because, as you can imagine, there's a bit of a, pay difference between being in public practice and working in the pro-life movement, but that's fine. So in September 2015, I left all my family and friends out here in Manitoba. That's where I am right now during this COVID-19 outbreak. And I drove 2,500 kilometers across the country to downtown Toronto. For those who know Toronto well, I lived at Dundas and Jarvis, which is pretty downtown Toronto. And I started working full time in the political pro-life movement. And so that is how, I left public practice and came into the pro-life movement. And, I'm quite grateful for the opportunity I had in public practice. I learned a lot of skills, both when it comes to accounting and when it comes to just general organization that I've been able to apply to right now, starting right now. I know other pro-life organizations out there have come to me asking me questions, accounting related, organization related, that I would not have the answers to if I didn't have that experience. So that experience very much was an investment for what we've been able to accomplish so far and what we're going to be able to accomplish as an organization and as a movement as well going forward.
Yeah, and thanks for that background, and it just helps us sort of transition into the conversation that we really do want to have today about the current leadership race in the Conservative Party. And so those who are watching, right now released its ranked ballot for this Conservative leadership race a couple weeks ago. And what you can see it, if you want to look at it, you can go to itstartsrightnow.ca and click Conservative Leadership 2020 at the top of the page. So, of course, the race was suspended, Scott, as of last week. And that's not the only news. The other news is that there were 8 candidates, and now that's dropped to 4. Of course, Sloan, Lewis, O'Toole, and McKay. So should pro-lifers be encouraged that Sloan and Lewis especially made the cut along with the 2 frontrunners?
Yeah, I think so. I think, Alyssa and I were discussing this the other day, and this has to be one of the most pro-life leadership ballots that we've seen for a major political party, federally, provincially, in the last number of years. So when you kind of look and break down between the different candidates, of course, Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan are 100% pro-life. They're both young, fantastic candidates from Ontario. We're really excited to have them in the race. But even when you break it down further and you look at some of the other candidates, I wouldn't necessarily describe Aaron O'Toole as being 100% pro-life, but there are certainly pro-life positions that he stakes out and he champions. Like, for example, he is against expanding the current criteria for assisted suicide. He wants to make sure that conscientious objection rights exist in law to protect healthcare professionals when it comes to issues like assisted suicide. Also, when it comes to the issue of funding abortions overseas, he wants to defund abortions overseas. All of these can be found, by the way, in the official party policy position of the Conservative Party of Canada. And they're quite popular across the country, especially in winnable ridings, not just amongst Conservative voters, but just amongst the Canadian electorate in general. So, of course, Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan go beyond Aaron O'Toole and what kind of pro-life policies they would like to champion. And that's one of the main reasons why they're ranked higher than Aaron on our recommended ranked ballot. But between the 3, I mean, it's a pretty decent ballot. And I think pro-lifers, if one of those 3 win, especially if Leslyn or Derek wins, pro-lifers are going to have a really big opportunity in the Conservative Party of Canada to get involved in nomination races, to get pro-lifers nominated in winnable ridings, to send people to convention. There's a party policy convention happening in November of this year. Hopefully, we'll see what happens with COVID-19. And that's an opportunity for pro-lifers to become delegates from their riding associations to go to Quebec City and vote for pro-life policies to be officially adopted by the Conservative Party of Canada. So there's lots of opportunity, and I think the ballot looks pretty darn good right now.
Now you touched on O'Toole, and we will discuss him a little bit more, especially in regards to the ballot. You got Leslyn Lewis at 76. You've got Derek Sloan at 75. What was the factor in Lewis edging out Sloan for you guys?
Yeah, and that's a great question. it's obviously very tight. There's just 1 point difference between the two. I personally know Leslyn and Derek, and they're both really great people. I remember Derek running for his nomination back in 2018, I believe 2018 he first started running for his nomination, obviously won it, and then won that riding. It was a riding that was held by a pro-abortion liberal. Now it's represented by a pro-life conservative, being Derek Sloan. So the guy knows how to campaign and the guy knows how to win. And he's just a very kind, genuine person. I got to meet Leslyn back in 2015. So like I said, I first had moved to Toronto in September 2015. She was the candidate in Scarborough Rouge Park, which is on kind of the very east side of the city of Toronto proper. And she stepped in as a candidate with something like 34 or 35 days left in the campaign because the previous candidate was disqualified for a rather kind of ridiculous reason. But anyway, she stepped in with 35 days left, and she was able to get the highest number of total raw votes for a conservative ever in that riding at that point. So they're both very impressive people. What separates the two of them on a recommended ranked ballot is our ranked ballot takes into consideration 3 general criteria. So number one, we look for, what are your pro-life positions and policies? And we determine that through the interview that we do with all the candidates who are willing to have an interview with us. Number two, we look at winnability. So we look at things such as, have you actually been elected to public office? Basically, can you win? Do you have cabinet experience? Can you run an organization like a political party, like a prime minister's office, like an entire government? Can you speak French? What are your likes and followers on social media? All these things determine to generally caucus support. All these things determine generally how winnable you are. And the third thing we look at, of course, is pro-life voting record. Now, Leslyn has never been elected to public office. Derek just was elected, so he doesn't have a pro-life voting record yet. So what it came down to essentially was that winnability factor. And when you look at all those different factors put together, because of Leslyn's much larger social media following, she just edged ahead of Derek in that regard. But I just want to highlight that both of them are very strong candidates, and we're very blessed in the pro-life movement to have both of them on the final ballot for this leadership race.
Now we did touch on a tool a little bit, and so we might be, I guess repeating ourselves. And of course, I'm of the opinion that it's not so much about a politician's personal convictions; it's about their voting record, like kind of like you touched on. And so it's not the end all if they're personally pro-life. It's sort of about whether they're going to let pro-life legislation go through. But you might be repeating yourself a little bit. But again, what I saw was 76%. That's Leslyn, 75. That's Sloan, and then 74. That's O'Toole, and so there's not really much of a separation there. How is it that he comes so close up behind the two very openly pro-life candidates in this race?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, our recommended ranked ballot takes into consideration 3 general criteria. We look at winnability. So when it comes to that, Aaron O'Toole has by far of the 4 candidates on the ballot, which of course includes Peter MacKay. He has by far the largest social media following. He has a good number of caucus members that are supporting him. He has been a federal cabinet minister. He has been elected multiple times. So his winnability is rather high. I think of all 4 on the ballot, he has the highest winnability factor that we were able to give him. On another criteria, our second criteria is their previous pro-life voting record. So these pro-life voting records we're looking at just pertain to the issues of abortion and assisted suicide. And on every question since he was elected in a by-election in late 2012, on abortion and assisted suicide, when it's come before the House of Commons, so far at least, Aaron O'Toole has a 100% pro-life voting record. Of course, we'll keep track of that as time goes forward. As we know, there's Kathy Wagner-Tall's sex-selective abortion bill. That vote was supposed to happen in May. Obviously, with COVID-19, that gets pushed back. So we would, very much look at that and perhaps have to do a readjustment based on people's voting records if that vote were to happen before the leadership vote. We're supposed to happen in June, but who knows about that. And then the third thing we also look at, and the thing that we put the most amount of weight to, are candidates' pro-life policies and platforms. So we determined this through an interview that's available online. We did an interview with 3 of the 4 candidates, and we all asked them the same questions. And we give points for policies that they're willing to champion. So like you said, Ben, we're not really interested in, whether they're personally pro-life or not. We want to know what specific pro-life policies are these candidates going to champion as leader and hopefully prime minister that would actually see a reduction in the total amount of abortions across Canada every year. And so based on all those things, Aaron does quite well. He came out with 74 points. The candidate, I would say, that didn't do so well would be Peter MacKay. Peter MacKay, I think, comes below 50% on a recommend rank ballot. We reached out to his campaign manager. We reached out to his campaign and gave him every opportunity to do an interview with us. I'm sure there's a little bit of common ground to be had with Peter MacKay, but he didn't take the opportunity. And, our organization always wants to champion the common ground that we have with candidates. Of course, we always highlight the significant differences. And on the significant differences, I think they're quite stark between Peter on one side and the other three candidates on the other side. And I include Aaron O'Toole in that. And there is a difference, obviously, between Aaron O'Toole and Derek and Leslin. But the biggest difference are those three and Peter MacKay. So Peter MacKay has said multiple times in the last couple of months that not only he would actually whip his cabinet to vote pro-abortion if there were a pro-life bill brought forward in the House of Commons, which goes against party policy. And that has never happened in the history of the Conservative Party since it was founded in 2004. Harper never did that. Harper sure put public pressure on, but when it came to Motion 312, Stephen Woodruff's bill to establish a committee to, find out when human life begins, of course, we all know the answer to that. No fewer than 10 people in Harper's cabinet voted against Stephen Harper and voted for that motion, including people like Jason Kenney and Ronna Ambrose, who became the interim leader between Harper and Scheer. So, that is quite unprecedented for Peter to say something like that. And so when people are, filling out their recommended ranked ballot, it's important to fill it out all the way, because maybe Aaron O'Toole isn't everyone's number one choice. I know he isn't my number one choice, but there is a massive difference between Aaron O'Toole and Peter MacKay. And if one wins over the other, it makes a really big difference for our organization as to how easy it will be to get pro-lifers to win nominations and then win those seats and increase the total number of pro-life MPs in the House of Commons. So that's kind of where Aaron O'Toole comes out on the leadership recommended ranked ballot. And that's how he comes out versus, versus Leslin and Derek in one corner, and then way on the other end being Peter MacKay.
Now, on this, I do want to just touch on this quickly. Ideally, as we look at the ranked ballot and how pro-lifers are gonna put the recommendations on there, their vote, should MacKay be number 4, or should he not even be on there?
That's a really good question. When we first did our recommended ranked ballot, we were dealing with 8 candidates that you had mentioned before. A number of those candidates didn't make it because they didn't make the requirements for the number of nomination signatures they had to get, or the number of money they had to raise, or some of them got disqualified, which is something we can talk about later on this interview if you'd like. But when it comes to peer, so now there are 4 candidates left, right? And so we did a readjustment of our ballots late last week. We released, of course, the readjusted ballot on Monday or Tuesday. So mathematically, if you follow our ballot, it doesn't matter if you put Peter MacKay on there or not, because if Peter MacKay is your last choice, and let's say Aaron O'Toole is your second last choice, and Aaron O'Toole comes in second place, well, automatically Peter MacKay wins, whether you put his name down on your ballot or not. What could make a difference is if the party sees, tens of thousands of people after Aaron O'Toole's dropped off just not vote at all, and Peter MacKay wins. Regardless, it doesn't matter, because mathematically at that point, Peter is going to win. So it's really up to, pro-lifers as to whether or not they want to put Peter MacKay on their ballot. We just show him in number 4 because that's.
All right. Well, it looks like we lost Scott, so we're just going to get you to bear with us for a second here. We're going to try to get him back, and then from there, we're going to continue on to some questions, maybe touching on MacKay a little bit more, and then maybe even touching on last election. So that's what we're going to work on right now, with everybody using the network, with with COVID-19 going on, we did expect some sort of issues like this where maybe somebody would cut out. He's back in my queue, so I'm going to get him up, and then we're going to continue with that question and then continue on. And hopefully there are no issues there. And Scott, welcome back. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, I guess my face broke the camera.
Well, technologically, that's not where I would settle. And the theory that I was positing was it's because everybody's on the network, and so I want to say on behalf of everybody, we forgive you, and we warmly welcome you back into the show. Now, you were talking about well, you were touching on McKay, but then you were going beyond that. So pick us up there if you can.
Sure. I don't know where I stopped off there, but I was just saying that, now there are 4 people on the ballot, and there probably will be just 4 people on the ballot, being Leslyn Lewis, Derek Sloan, Aaron O'Toole, Peter McKay. I say it in that order because that's the order of our recommended ranked ballot. If you, like me, like if you put Aaron O'Toole as your third choice, so let's say, number 1's Leslyn, she drops off, and then number 2 is Derek, he drops off, and then number 3 is Aaron. Aaron has to win at that point, one way or the other. And if Aaron doesn't win, it doesn't really matter if you put Peter McKay, number 4, not on your ballot, because he automatically is going to win. What they might notice at party headquarters is like, oh, holy moly, like there were 50,000 people who, after Aaron O'Toole, just didn't put anyone down at all. So that might be noted, but it's like a Pyrrhic victory because, Peter McKay would win anyway. So on our recommend ranked ballot, we just have him as number 4 because whether you put him down on your ballot or not, at that point, he would win.
And I hope that we get a chance later to touch on sort of, McKay himself and maybe what the options would be for pro-lifers if he did ended up being the winner of the leadership race. But for now, I'm gonna switch gears. And then we're going to get into some public questions. So, yeah, still encouraging you on the chat. Just bring in your public questions. We lost Scott again, but yeah, just bring in your public questions on the chat because we want to give Scott as many questions as possible. And of course, it's a great opportunity for you to ask him something that you wouldn't normally get to ask him because he's probably a pretty hard guy to get in contact with. So when we get him back on here, we're going to go into the last election a little bit. Hopefully we don't lose him again, and we're still waiting on that. As we're waiting, I could tell some jokes. None are really coming to mind right now. Hopefully everybody is staying just safe, healthy, antisocial. These are all very important things. I think that I think a lot of introverts are really enjoying what's going on right now. I am not one of those people. I'm an extroverted person, and I think this is all horrible and stupid. And I'm being prompted by a random viewer to talk about my involvement in politics. And so, as I touched on at the beginning of the show, door knocking and political phone calling, these are things that are close to me. And I've had involvement in a number of campaigns from a very early age, and my dad is the reason for that. Whenever an election would come around, he was just at the doors. And so he would take me, and we would set up signs, and we would do that kind of stuff. I was involved actually on staff with the Nathan Newdorf campaign in the provincial election, the 2019 provincial election, and we were able to win that constituency in Lethbridge East. And so that was a really cool experience, and I've also been involved with Mike Lake and with Kathy Wagenthal, as well as some Wildrose candidates who ran sort of in the Edmonton and the Red Deer area. So that's kind of been my involvement. We're still waiting on Scott. We don't see him, so like I said, hopefully we get him back soon. I'm also getting some prompting to talk about the medals, and I'm actually just communicating with Scott right now, so give me a moment here. We're going to try to figure this out, so I'm just going to put you on hold. Don't go away. Don't go away. We will figure this out, and we will come back in some capacity, so please stick around. Okay, welcome back to this very exciting episode of the show. I've got Scott on the line here, and so what we're going to do is we're not going to bring him back up on the screen, but we're just gonna have him on the phone, so it'll just be an auditory interview. I'm going to hold him up to my mic, and please please let us know if there are any audio issues. So that's how we're going to do it. So Scott, just on the line here. What I wanted to do, sort of before your network kicked off again, was I wanted to touch base on the last leadership race in the last election with Andrew Scheer. And so, obviously, there were issues with his campaign in terms of the personally pro-life and the voting record. Hindsight is always 2020. We know that, but what my question is, looking back, would he have remained your candidate in that election?
I think given, well, first off, our number one recommendation was Pierre Lemieux. It wasn't Andrew Scheer. Andrew Scheer was our number two recommendation. And I think looking at all the candidates who were presenting themselves for the leadership race, we probably would have done the exact same thing. Andrew had, I would argue, made some bad choices as to who he surrounded himself with in his OLO, that's the Office of the Leader of the Opposition, and a little bit on his campaign. And I think that made a really big difference. We did an analysis of the election, riding by riding. We looked at all the numbers, and we determined like the one region of the country where the Conservative Party of Canada had a decrease in the total number of votes from 2015 to 2019 was in the suburban GTA in the 905. And there are 28 ridings in the GTA that surround the city of Toronto proper. And it's the only place in the country where the Conservatives went down from 2011 to 2015, and then down even further from 2015 to 2019. And so the question is why? And so when you break down each of those ridings, and each riding has roughly 180 to about 200, 210 polling stations, and you look at the different polling stations in the different neighborhoods within those ridings, you can see that amongst especially new Canadian communities, people who typically are, Sikh, or they are, different types, sects of Muslim, or they're Eastern Catholics, or they're Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, they actually, practice the faith. They go to large parishes or large gurdwaras that are vibrant and growing and young. And those neighborhoods and those ridings, they had a very, very low overall turnout rate. The number of people who are registered and able to vote as a percentage were much lower in those polls than, the average in the riding or the average across the country. And so what this suggests is that with Andrew Scheer listening to the advice of his people of running away from the pro-life issue instead of embracing it with, reasonable and popular pro-life policies like legal restrictions on late-term abortions or legal restrictions on sex-selective abortions, he would have won those ridings. He would have won those ridings rather handedly and probably would have won government, pushing perhaps even majority status. But by not doing that and kind of listening to the old diatribes of, professional conservatives, so to speak, people who commentate on those political talk shows that don't have actual connections across the country, especially in these winnable ridings, they lost. And the Conservative Party of Canada in general will keep losing until they actually embrace, these popular and reasonable pro-life policies.
Well, and that I appreciate you answering that. There was definitely, for me, there was a misconception that Scheer was at the top of your ballot. So it's good that we can know now that it was actually Lemieux. We're going to move to some public questions, and the first one that we have is from Frida, and what she's asking is, have any of the four candidates sort of explicitly, well, I'll just read what she said. Are there any Conservative candidates clear on their willingness to reopen the abortion debate? So has anybody voiced to you that they very much plan to do that?
Well, the top two candidates have. If you go to our website, it's startsrightnow.ca/CDC_leadership2020. There you will find the interviews we did with three of the four candidates. And with two of those three candidates, being Leslie Lewis and Derek Sloan, they both said that they want to reopen the issue. Derek Sloan said in a more general way that he thinks a parliament should discuss some sort of abortion law. He didn't really propose what exactly that would look like. But he did also say explicitly that he is against sex-selective abortion, that there should be legal restrictions on that, that he would defund abortions overseas, that he would support conscientious ejection rights, and of course uphold the rights of parliamentarians within the Conservative caucus to introduce, speak to, debate on, and freely vote on any private members' legislation when it comes to abortion. With Leslyn Lewis, she has a little more of a refined platform. She has 4 general policies that she would like to talk about. She wants to defund abortions overseas. She wants to make sure that sex-selective abortions are not that are legally restricted. She wants to make sure that coerced abortions are legally restricted as well. So we think back to, I believe, the 39th or 40th Parliament. Rod Bernouge introduced a piece of legislation in that Parliament called C-510, and that was a private member's bill that would make it illegal and a criminal offense to coerce a woman into having an abortion. And then the 4th thing on her pro-life platform is making sure that crisis pregnancy centers have enough funding and enough resources and support to help women who make that life-affirming decision across Canada. So those 2 candidates, being Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan, have both explicitly said in various ways that they would like to reopen, well, but not reopen the issue. That's a bad term to use. The issue was never closed. The Supreme Court never said that this was a closed issue or that abortion was a constitutional right. They want to continue the discussion that has been happening for the last 30 plus years and have it represented in Parliament and actually discuss, some reasonable pro-life policies, regulations, and laws that we see right across the country. So those 2 candidates have spoken to that. As for Aaron O'Toole, he hasn't been nearly as explicit, and that's why there is a difference between Aaron and Leslyn and Derek. But Aaron has said that he very much would like to see the defunding of abortions overseas. And I think that's a good thing as well. So that's kind of where those 3 candidates stand specifically on our pro-life issues.
We're going to jump to a question from Daniel, switching gears a little bit here. Are there polls available, Scott, that show how the candidates are doing in the leadership vote?
That's a really great question from Daniel. And the problem with that is when different polling companies poll on where the candidates are in a leadership race, they have to be very, very specific in the sample population that they use. So, for example, if you just poll Canadians in general, and in most polls will use anywhere between 1,100 and I think Angus Reid usually uses about 4,000 Canadians in a poll. The problem is that not every Canadian is going to vote in the leadership race. Only those Canadians that have a membership to the Conservative Party of Canada as of May 15th, 2020 are eligible to vote in the leadership race. So those are the people that you want to poll. You want to poll people who are in the Conservative Party of Canada. Of course, the party, for legal purposes and privacy laws, cannot disclose who is or who is not a member of their party. No political party can do that. So it's really difficult to conduct polls at this time. Different polling companies attempt to do that, but the people who are going to have the best data are the candidates themselves, because all 4 candidates who are on the final ballot have access to the party membership list, and they will be doing their own polling, their own focus groups, and things like that. So it's really difficult to know specifically where the different candidates are at. I can say this, though, that I have connections, as we should with right now. We have connections with all 4 camps, and all 4 camps have indicated to me, various things with the numbers that they're looking at and the numbers that they're gathering in. And I can say that it is a very competitive leadership race. And for someone like Peter MacKay, who's ostensibly, well, no, I wouldn't say that. He's objectively the co-founder of the Conservative Party of Canada. He should be running away with this thing, and I can very much tell you that he is not, and that there is a mathematical pathway forward, especially with the suspension and extension of the membership deadline for both Leslyn Lewis and Derek Sloan. The only way that's going to happen, though, is if pro-lifers such as yourself, Ben, myself, and everyone listening to this call purchase a $15 membership to the Conservative Party of Canada by May 15th. And while we're, in quarantine for COVID-19, sign up with us. We have lists of lots of people to sell memberships to, and do so with your family and friends. The more people that purchase, the more pro-lifers that purchase memberships and vote in the leadership race, the much higher the chance we're going to have of getting someone like Leslyn Lewis or Derek Sloan to be the next leader of the party and hopefully the next prime minister.
And that's a great answer, and I appreciate that. Our next question comes from Maureen. And what she says is, I'm concerned about the tone of the campaign. Sometimes we sound harsh, strident, like broken glass. Which candidate has better marketing, showing a warmer, loving presence?
That's a really good question. It's rather subjective, so I'm going to try to answer it as objectively as possible. With our organization right now, we really try to find a common ground with people. Most Canadians hold some sort of pro-life position. There are very, very few Canadians, when you look at most polls, there are very few Canadians that are 100% pro-choice. Most Canadians, 70% plus, think that there should be legal restrictions when it comes to late-term abortions, especially in the third trimester. 84% plus of Canadians think that there should be legal restrictions when it comes to sex-selective abortions. And while both of these two things together don't constitute the majority of abortions, it is where Canadians are at, and both of those laws would be a lot better than what we have now, which is no law at all. So I think reaching out to those Canadians that hold those views is important, but that means that you have to speak their language and you have to meet them at where they're at. That's something that our organization always strives very hard to do, and I think we're very successful. A big portion of that, I would argue, is because of my colleague Alyssa Globe. She runs our social media. She does a lot of our comms and our talking points, and I think they work very well. Looking at the candidates when it comes to our issue, I think there is a bit of a difference between Leslyn and Derek on that. And those are campaign choices to make those decisions. But I'm glad that both of them are speaking to this issue. And I think, they both speak rather competently to this issue and with conviction and with confidence. So I would encourage people to take a peek at, the social media, the different e-blasts they're sending out, things like that between Leslyn and Derek, and they can make their own, their own decision and their own judgments. I think that there is a difference a little bit in tone between the two, but it depends how different people receive different types of communications in different ways. So I would just encourage people to take a peek at that.
And with that, we do have a COVID question, and that is from Dina. How is right now adapting with COVID? What strategies are being used to reach new people?
That's a really great question, and the first thing that I just want everyone on the call to make sure is that everyone's just staying safe and staying home if need be. It's a very much a real thing. It is happening. It's not something to be fearful of, but it's something to, concern yourself with. My fiance, for example, she's a paramedic, so she's on the front lines. So by staying home, you're helping someone out like her. I came home to Brandon to wait out the quarantine at my parents' place because I figured if this thing is going to go into late spring, early summer, I might as well have access to a barbecue in a backyard, unlike the condo in downtown Ottawa. That being said, because my fiance is a paramedic, I'm not going to see her for a very, very long time, most definitely months. And I would very much like to see her again. So it's important that we all stay home. Also had a buddy of mine, a really good friend of mine, actually, who I went to high school with, and him and I were talking earlier today. And he actually contracted COVID-19, and he said it was one of the worst experiences of his life. He said, thank God that didn't spread to my lungs. So it sounds like a nasty thing. All this to say, how does this affect right now? Well, the thing is, we're all at home, or we all should be home. So whether you're working from home from your laptop, or maybe you have some more flexible hours, we have found that this is a great opportunity for us to call through our massive list of Right Now supporters across the country and to encourage them to purchase memberships by May 15th to the Conservative Party of Canada so they can vote for the pro-life candidates. Last week on Twitter, we saw basically a complete meltdown of Peter MacKay and his team because LEOC, which stands for the Leadership Election Organizing Committee of the Conservative Party of Canada, those are the people who are appointed by the elected National Council to run the leadership race. They had made the decision to extend the leadership race. The reason why Peter MacKay and his people we're so upset about this is because it buys us, being pro-lifers, more time and a greater opportunity to actually increase the number of pro-lifers who make up the voting members of the Conservative Party of Canada. So if you're at home during this COVID-19 quarantine, which hopefully you are, and you have some extra time on the afternoons or in the evenings, and you say, hey, you know what, I can make some calls, that's an easy thing to do, let us know. Send an email, info@startsrightnow.ca. We'll provide you a script, a super easy script to use. We'll give you, a couple hundred names to call through, every week or so. And together we can definitely use this opportunity to very much increase the number of pro-lifers who are members of the party, so that the pro-life candidates have a far better chance and an increasing chance as time goes on of actually winning the leadership of the party itself, and hopefully they would then become prime minister. So, we're trying to make the best lemonade we can out of the lemons that we've been presented. I can say that for the number of volunteers who have been calling through our lists, most people who pick up the phone, like well over 90%, 95% of the people who pick up the phone, are happy to hear from us, because it's something that's not related to COVID-19. It's something simple they can do. It's something that they believe in. They believe in making sure that pro-life candidates, especially pro-life leadership candidates, have the best possible chance of winning. And that means right now, that means purchasing a membership to the party. So for all the people out there, I would encourage you to sign up with us and do some calls. One thing we challenge everyone to do is make 20 phone calls for every hour of Netflix that you watch. So you can have a bit of a productive time while at home during quarantine.
And I echo that call for sure. I not just because everybody should get involved, but because it's a very fulfilling thing. And I can say the same thing. It's great to go out for a night of door knocking and come to the end of the night. Not obviously in the midst of COVID-19, we're not going to do that, but get on the phone, and I echo that completely. Now that brings us to a question from Mediliad. Besides the Conservatives, Scott, which mainstream or elected party has the most potential to be politically pro-life?
That's a really great question. And one thing we always like to reiterate is that our organization is not partisan. We're political but not partisan. We look forward to working within all political parties across Canada. We have to pick the lowest hanging fruit. So right now, the lowest hanging fruit is the Conservative Party of Canada. In the last federal election, we had well over 100 of their candidates be 100% pro-life. We were able to increase the number of pro-lifers elected to the House of Commons, and well over half of the Conservative caucus now is 100% pro-life. That being said, in order for us to actually pass pro-life legislation, we need 170 pro-life MPs. So that's not 170 Conservative MPs or 170 Liberal MPs. It's 170 pro-life MPs. So right now we're at 68, so we have about another 100 or so to go, which is very doable. It's going to take a couple of election cycles. Now, to say that all 170 of those pro-life MPs will also be Conservatives, that's kind of tough. We could probably get 155 of those 170 be Conservative, but to get all 170 to be Conservative, you're really, really stretching it. So we're going to need some pro-life MPs down the next couple of elections here from other political parties. And so, the political parties that we look to get involved in are political parties that have a mathematical probability of winning some seats. So those are the kind of your mainstream political parties, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the NDP, perhaps even the Bloc Québécois and the Greens. So with the listener's question, I would say that the next political party that would present the biggest opportunity, I would say, are the Greens. They're small, but they are growing. They're growing in popularity in particular pockets across the country. There are a number of people who vote Green and are part of the Green Party, particularly in the south part of Vancouver Island, that are 100% pro-life. They're not pro-life for religious reasons. I would even argue they're not even pro-life necessarily for scientific reasons. They're pro-life because it comes into the Green philosophy. Having an abortion procured is not a natural, operation. That's not something that naturally happens. Pregnancy in their eyes, and I would argue in our eyes as well, is not a disease. So within their Green philosophy, abortion is just something that does not fit into that, and it's something that they are against. So I'd say that's a good low-hanging piece of fruit. The Green Party is going through a leadership race. We are paying attention to the candidates there. And depending on how this COVID-19 quarantine period plays out, it's something we might see an opportunity to get involved in. The next party I would say is the NDP, which might shock a lot of people, but the NDP do have a history of having pro-lifers involved in their party. You look at someone like Joe Borowski from Wynyard, Saskatchewan. I mean, he's buried there right by my great-grandparents. He went to the same catechism class as my babsha. He grew up within the NDP, being part of a private sector mining union up in northern Manitoba. He was a provincial NDP cabinet minister in the Schreier government and 100% pro-life. And he wasn't the only NDP MP or MLA, MPP, whatever the case might be across the country, who was pro-life at that time. Now the party is not pro-life, but in order for us to change the culture of the party, it's not that difficult to do. Within the NDP, they have, a lot of people don't know this, but the NDP is legally a partnership between the CCF, the Commonwealth Cooperative Federation, which is the precursor party to the NDP, and CLC, not Campaign Life Coalition, but the other CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress, which is an umbrella group, kind of like NCLN. It's an umbrella group of a bunch of different unions across the country. As such, they have what's called ex officio status. So the unions that belong to the Canadian Labour Congress, they get X amount of votes at party policy conventions, nomination races, and leadership races. So a lot of people who belong to private sector unions, think of like Teamsters, forestry workers, steel workers, a lot of those people, while they might be voting NDP for economic reasons, socially, they're rather conservative. They're rather pro-life, and when it comes to other social conservative issues, they're rather socially conservative. As a really quick aside, one time I went to, I think it was the 2008 NDP provincial policy convention here in Manitoba in Brandon, and I was an observer for the Progressive Conservative Party of Manitoba. So parties will send observers to different party policy conventions. You take notes, you get access to different things, and you do up a report and you send it back. And I can tell you that I have never been in a room where there is such a stark difference and like two different groups of people that never ever talk to each other, because you had your, I suppose ostensibly well-dressed, kind of metrosexual looking guy sitting beside big, gruff, biker, beer swiggling, 379 jean jacket union guy. And they never talk to each other the whole weekend because they don't share the same values. That guy that wears that union jean jacket, he shares this, chances are, and statistically it shows, he shares the same values we do when it comes to these pro-life issues. So within the NDP, we see, a great opportunity to work within that party to at least make it neutral to allow pro-lifers to run. And of course, there's a Liberal Party, which does have a historical presence of pro-lifers in caucus. I believe there's only one left in caucus right now. He doesn't vote pro-abortion, but he also doesn't vote pro-life. He literally leaves the chamber when our issues come up, and that's kind of the best they can offer. So, within the Liberals, there isn't quite that national constituency. We keep track of people in our database who are Liberals, and there are a number of them. But we see larger national constituencies in particular ridings within other political parties over the Liberals. So that's kind of where the landscape looks like. Our goal going for the next 10 years to 2030 is to make sure that we have pro-life representation from every major political party in the House of Commons within their caucuses. And I think that's a very attainable goal, and it's a very necessary goal if we want to make sure that we have a voting pro-life majority in the House of Commons.
Well, that's a great map, and I appreciate you laying that out. So for the sake of time, I have a few more questions, but we only have time for one. And so what I'm going to settle on here is one from Orb University. The common answer that we heard from Andrew Scheer, Scott, was that the CPC will not open the debate. This is an example of poor talking points. How do you think these candidates will respond?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, the last part?
Sure. So Andrew Scheer is saying that the CPC will not reopen the debate. How do you think these candidates on this ballot will respond?
Oh, but we already know how they responded. It was a question earlier. So, Derek Sloan has championed a variety of pro-life policies that are already within the Conservative Party of Canada policy declaration. That's their party's official stance on a variety of policies. So Derek has come out and confidently and competently championed things like defunding abortion overseas, making sure there are conscientious rejection rights for healthcare professionals, not expanding the current criteria for assisted suicide. Excuse me. And he's also come out saying that pro-lifers in the House of Commons should be able to introduce pro-life legislation, that it would not be a whipped vote, and that he thinks that having some sort of reasonable legislation on abortion should be discussed in the House of Commons. He's also come out against sex-selective abortions. Leslyn Lewis has championed all those things as well. She has a 4-point policy. 2 of them are already mentioned, which is defunding abortion overseas, legal restrictions on sex-selective abortions. And she has also said that she would like to make sure that crisis pregnancy centers across Canada have the necessary resources and funding so that they can support women who are in crisis pregnancies to make life-affirming choices and to support them after they make those life-affirming choices. A lot of crisis pregnancy centers work does not end at the birth. It very much continues for the next couple of years. I would know because I'm on the board of directors of one of them. And then the other thing she champions as well is making sure that those who coerce women into having abortions can be criminally charged under the Criminal Code of Canada to make sure that women are not coerced into making such a decision. So a lot of the candidates have already responded to those questions, and I agree that Andrew Scheer's talking points leading up to, most especially during the election, were rather poor. It's a good friend of mine, Jonathan Van Maren, said, when Harper said that he wouldn't reopen the abortion debate, the social liberals believed him and the social conservatives didn't believe him. Whereas when Andrew Scheer says it, it was the reverse. The social liberals didn't believe him and the social conservatives did. So it was kind of the worst of both worlds, so to speak. And I think going forward, any candidate that who is leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, that actually wants to win government and win a majority government, has to champion some of these reasonable pro-life issues. The only time in the history of the Conservative Party of Canada since its founding in 2004 that they won a majority government and won most of the votes and the seats in the GTA is when they had a pro-life policy, and that was not funding abortions overseas. And that was in the 2000 federal election under Stephen Harper. And that is the one and only time they won a majority government. And ever since then, when that policy and other pro-life policies were not championed, they've seen their votes decline in where the most amount of swing ridings are, which is in the suburban GTA. So we know where different candidates on the final ballot already stand on this issue. 2 of them want to actually open it up. Aaron O'Toole hasn't said as much, although he does champion a couple of pro-life policies. Peter MacKay is basically on the exact other end. He wants to whip his cabinet to make sure that they all vote pro-abortion, which basically means that no pro-lifers will be represented in his cabinet at all, which means that for our issue, there's basically no difference between Justin Trudeau's cabinet and Peter MacKay's cabinet. So that's kind of where all the candidates stand at this time on those issues.
All right, fantastic. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. So, Scott, we want to thank you for joining us and for taking our questions and for taking the public questions. So, we wish you the best in your isolation in Manitoba, and we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ben. I encourage everyone to visit our website. It startsrightnow.ca. And if you have some time in your hands, making a few phone calls, like 1 or 2 hours per week, would be a huge help to sell some memberships for those pro-life candidates. Just get a hold of us and send an email to info@startsrightnow.ca. Thanks for the opportunity, and I hope everyone's staying safe out there.
Awesome. Yeah, we echo that for sure. And stay healthy. We need you alive. So there you go.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, Scott. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our show. I am seeing in the comments some requests to address the ribbons in the background. I was informed by my mom that it makes me look self-serving, and I agree. I just don't care. Now, I will speak to them a little bit. They are Bible quizzing ribbons as we end off here, and so a lot of people watching probably don't know what Bible quizzing is. It's a competitive Bible memorization program that I was a part of, and as you can see, was pretty good at. So that's what the ribbons are for. I did not set up this background. It doesn't matter. I don't care what you think, but I set up the background because I'm not going to demonstrate, Ruth. There's a window in this room right here. Thank you, Seth. And so when I am facing this way, my face is lit better. Whereas if I was facing a different way, then only like partially my face would be lit. So I'm just going to adjust that. If you would like to know more about Bible quizzing, I used to be a journalist and I did a story on it. And I encourage you on YouTube to search Bible Quizzing Bridge City News. That's Bible Quizzing Bridge City News if you want to learn more about what the program does. So that is all I'm going to say about that. Thank you so much for joining our show. And again, we are very appreciative of Scott coming on. For those whose questions didn't get asked, we encourage you to reach out to Right Now by going to their website. And again, go to their website. It starts right now. Contact them, view their ballot, get to know more about the work that they do. And yeah, we really appreciate you tuning in today to sort of engage with us on our first public episode of the Extra Pro-Life Show. Next week, we will be talking to Reverend Lindsay Burt out of Full Gospel Assembly in St. John, New Brunswick, as well as Mark Vella, who has very much been involved with the Conservative Party and establishing a certain committee with political involvement within the church. So tune in for that. It's going to be at the same time. If you have registered, then you will get that link. As for today, that's all we have. And so we really hope that you took a lot from it, and we really hope that we will see you next week as well. So God bless you all. Stay isolated, stay antisocial, stay healthy. Don't die, because just like the preborn, we need you alive. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.